Hey guys, welcome. So we have now read section 1 of Beowulf, entitled Grendel. So think of these as kind of like chapters. Remember, these are only excerpts. This is a much, much longer text, but they kind of pulled out the main pieces to help you follow along with the general plot of Beowulf as a whole, because there are lots and lots of extra pieces, little side plots, things of that nature. So we're just going to stick focused on the one primary journey per se. So first things first, I hope you guys noticed that literally from the first stanza of this epic poem, we are seeing that clash of good versus evil, and not just typical good versus evil, definitely religious good versus evil. But also remember that this text was written by Christian monks. The original text, or the original story, the epic poem of Beowulf, was originally an oral tradition. It was sung to music. Poets knew this by heart, like they could just ramble it off the top of their head. And it was like our version of going to the movies or listening to music. It was a form of entertainment, but it also helped us understand what the culture valued. It helped us to understand their religious beliefs. It helped us to see, who was seen as good and who was seen as bad, in what context that was okay to do certain things. We were definitely seeing how important Christianity was, but we're still seeing some remnants of pagan religions, which again is more of a nature-based religion. And remember, we are looking here at Old English. And so this is a translation, and you should keep that in mind as well. So it's not only translated by the Christian monks, it's also translated from Old English. And choices have been made in that text. So one version you have has been translated to help you read it a little bit more smoothly. But we also have full books of the poem Beowulf, and there are translations as well. So here we see one of those split texts where it says the original version on the left side and the translated version on the right side. I'm sure this looks backwards to you guys, but this is the original text, and here is the translated into modern English version, and it's the entirety of the text, not just the few sections we're going to be looking at. So the version you read and this version here in this book will be different in themselves just because they're translated by different people. And translations always make choices. Translators make choices. So if anybody happens to speak a second language, you already know this. We make choices about what words to use in particular contexts, and that gets even more complicated when you add a second language into the mix, or, a very, very newer form of a previous and almost dead language. Not many people speak or read Old English, let alone fluently. I do have a professor who can in college, and I'm still working with her today a little bit on some of that stuff. It's very, very crazy to hear, even crazier to look at. It doesn't even look like real words, but that's neither here nor there. Back to the good versus evil. So good versus evil, and again, that religious tone of good versus evil. So we've only really met Grendel so far. Grendel, and we've met the Danes, the Danish people. When they start talking about the Geats, for example, that's not going to be Hrothgar's people or the Danish people. It's going to be a different group of people. So just kind of keep that in mind when you start hearing that term. It's a different group of people. So Grendel is, from the very beginning of this work, described as essentially a descendant from the devil himself. So if you look at some of those references, I asked you guys to be on the lookout for allusions, particularly biblical allusions, which, remember, allusions are references to persons, places, or things outside of the text itself, and biblical allusions are references to the Bible in a text. So in this case, we are going to see tons and tons of biblical allusions since Christian monks wrote it down. They might want to sprinkle their religious beliefs in there too and mix it in with the pagan pagan messages and religious beliefs. So, if you've ever heard the phrase, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar, this is kind of that to a T. So Christian monks were slowly but surely trying to take over and convert these pagan believers to Christian believers. So the way they did that was they would sprinkle stuff in, little by little, say, hey, our stuff's not different than that. Look, we have a God too. Look, he expects good things. Look, he admires this particular quality just like you do. And so they sprinkled it in little by little, making connections, building together. That's that honey. They're slowly attracting these people in a way that's not violent. Versus other places that, are converted through violence. Which, if you've ever read the text, Things Fall Apart, for example, you're going to see a good bit of that in certain parts of it. Any part of colonizing from the British Empire, basically anywhere, or the Roman Empire, just about anywhere, besides Greece. They were nice to the Greeks, but that's about it. Everything else kind of is changed by force. And the U.S. is kind of guilty of this too nowadays. We kind of go in, strong-arm people to do what we want rather than maybe making some of those honey connections and, changing things by making comparisons and making connections. So we see the Christian monks really, really putting their foot into it here, putting those biblical allusions in there. And of course, the first really, really important one is in that very first stanza. It's a reference to the biblical story of Cain and Abel, which I'm hoping you already know about. If so, refresher. If not, it's potentially important for you to be at least familiar with really important Bible stories in English literature, because there are tons and tons of references. And it's not me preaching at you, but it's something you want to understand because they make a lot of connections to the Bible with this text. So again, Grendel is compared to Cain, and the story of Cain and Abel is they are brothers, and they are the first offspring of Adam and Eve after the fall. The fall being original sin, Eve eating the apple, that whole business. So they move. They're trying to, figure out their life. They're trying to settle everything. They have these two children, Cain and Abel, and Cain actually is jealous of his brother Abel and kills him, and it is classified as the first murder in Christianity. Classified as the first murder. So, Cain is seen as the original bad guy, the original murderer for humankind. And so it's kind of like Eve, Cain, everybody else. So Grendel is literally directly referenced to being a relative of Cain. So Grendel and Cain are saying, Grendel is so evil, he is literally a descendant of Cain, the original, murderous bad guy. And if you start reading this text, you're going to see that there's lots of talk about power and who has it. So at first, they really focus on the fact that Grendel and all these bad entities, these ghosts, ghouls, goblins, whatever, don't have that power. And they don't really say that God has it, but they specifically tell you that the evil ones don't, that Grendel doesn't. And we see that especially when we start talking about Hrothgar's throne. Remember, Hrothgar is the king of the Danish people right now. And he is... he's got this magnificent hall, a mead hall, which mead is beer, in case you didn't know that. He has this big throne, and it's supposedly watched over by God and all this kind of stuff. And it's seen as a great thing, and Grendel doesn't touch it because, he can't know God's love, all this kind of stuff. And it says all this in the text, guys. If you go back and look at that section, it's on the 3rd page, I believe. Maybe 4:12-ish, 11:12-ish. I don't have the text in front of me, so I can't give you an exact number, but it's towards the end of one of those sections. And it, it describes Grendel as being murderous and bloodthirsty and animalistic, and it talks about how he can't know God's love and he won't touch the throne, Hrothgar's throne, because it is protected by God, and all this other stuff. And that biblical reference, or those biblical allusions and references, are going to get stronger throughout the text. And especially since we still haven't met our hero, that is going to happen very, very shortly. We're going to start getting more of those positive references. But of course, keep those negative references in mind to Grendel. And think about what his motivations are, or what he seems to have motivations to do. And one of those important things is the last thing I want to mention for this video, which is the seasons. So I don't know if you guys made a note of this reference. I thought it was a little weird. But they specifically say that the Mead Hall Heorot is actually closed for 12 winters. They specifically talk about it being closed for 12 winters. So, there are obviously 4 seasons. Winter typically seen as maybe the last of those. The next we'll have is, of course, spring. Then we have summer. And then we finally have fall. And those are typically seen as secular, or they go in a circle. They're a cycle. And of course, those are also an important literary technique known as an archetype. Archetypes are patterns in literature that can be seen throughout different cultures and throughout different time periods, but they generally reference the same thing. So, for example, the seasons can be an example of this, the generic plots of a different text. So when we looked at the idea of tragedy being a pretty similar plot throughout, those can be classified as archetypes. So you generally can tell me the plot of a horror movie or an action movie or a romantic comedy. You can tell me the plot because those are archetypes. Those are things that constantly reoccur and they don't really change. Little details here and there change, but overall the story does not. You know how it's going to end. You know the basic pieces that will happen. And that's all you really need to know. We don't go to the movies to be surprised by something new. We kind of go just to kind of see what they change. But if they change it too much, we don't like it. So typically when you don't like a movie, it's because it goes too far past what you were expecting, or maybe not enough. Either way, you end up not liking it because it doesn't meet that happy little medium. But that's neither here nor there. Looking back at the seasons, you're going to see that each of these seasons corresponds to a portion of life. So when we're looking at spring, for example, spring is either going to be like birth or rebirth. And rebirth, you can normally associate this with cleansing. The same thing can be said for water. Water is typically seen as cleansing, so when it rains in a text, sometimes that can be seen as cleansing. Then you have summer. Summer is going to be like the good years of life, where you're youthful and you grow and you develop and you're having the time of your life. This is going to be kind of like your good years, or like the life part of your life. And of course, you're going to see this, associated with like sunshine and, warm colors like oranges and yellows and greens. You're going to see it with those kind of colors that are a little bit warmer. And then you're going to move into, which I know green is it's not quite a warm color, but you know what I mean. And then we're going to start heading towards fall. Fall is going to be more like your older years, so you're getting closer to the end of your life. You've lived like, your youth. You're, aging. You're, not quite able to do what you used to. Fall, of course, is going to be associated with getting closer to the end of life. You're going to think of nature as in leaves falling, as in, the weather's changing, things like that. And then finally you have winter, which is typically seen as the end of life or death. Everything kind of like stops. So, typically you're going to think of colors like gray, black, white, you're going to think of those more extreme colors rather than those warm colors you're going to see with some of these other seasons. And those colors also have meanings as well. Those are also classified as archetypes. So seasons are archetypes, general plots are archetypes, colors, weather patterns. So storms are typically seen as something dangerous, fog is something mysterious, sunshine is typically a good omen, or a positive hint towards the future rather than a negative omen or a bad hint towards the future. They specifically reference 12 winters, though, in this text. 12 winters seems important because they're not saying it was 12 happy summers. They're not saying it was a rebirth of any sort. They're not saying it's getting worse. It's been consistently death, because Grendel comes in every night for as long as there's people at Heorot, and he murders, constantly murdering, enjoying the murder. He's almost described as animalistic. He says stuff like, he's described as having claws, and he's bloodthirsty, and he's aggressive, and he enjoys the aggression. He enjoys the murder. So think about that motivation and how important that is to the biblical references. So those 12 winters, I think, is really important because they could have chose anything. They could have chose any of seasons. They could have just said 12 years. They could have said a lot of things, but they specifically choose to say 12 winters. So 12 seasons of death. And I think that's a really important, like, setup for the rest of this text, that you know that it feels kind of like drained and dreary and deadly. It just feels very dangerous moving forward. And this would have been something people would have understood. That 12 winters would have been something, deadly. Because, winter can typically be deadly, especially at this time. We see a lot of people not necessarily knowing how to, maybe regulate temperatures. They had to use fire to keep themselves warmer, use pelts from animals. We're not, like, super sophisticated. Yeah, we may have, like, buildings and stuff, but, like, we don't have central heating. Like, that's not a thing. So, death would have been, imminent, especially if all the animals are kind of hiding and, not moving around as much as they would during other seasons. So lack of food, lack of warmth, it could be easy for somebody who didn't prepare properly for the winter to die. So 12 seasons of death, or 12 winters, seems important to kind of keep this text going, or get it started, I should say. And finally, I know I keep saying finally, but this is really the last thing. Not only do we see these important archetypes, this death, you're going to see how opposing this is to Beowulf and how it kind of sets up everything for the rest of the text. And it's going to be definitely that good versus evil, that major contrast between Christian good and Christian evil. So keep an eye out for those seasons. Keep an eye out for how Beowulf is described in relation to Grendel, because they are going to be very, very opposite. And obviously, because this is a good guy versus a bad guy, the good guy has to win. So we already know that going in. So keep that in mind as we start to see things about Beowulf in our second section entitled, aptly enough, Beowulf. Let me know if there are any additional questions as of right now. I am going to try to do a little bit of a review situation after we finish each section. I am going to ask you to do activities with several of the sections, so keep that in mind. It's not always going to be like answer some questions, mostly because that doesn't really help anybody. That doesn't get you thinking, and I am really interested in making you think and getting you like where you need to be, rather than just you answering or potentially Googling. Let's be real, Googling a bunch of answers that aren't going to help you. So, let me know if there are any questions. I'd be happy to, again, answer them. I am available whenever, but please keep in mind that asking me to answer questions on the day something is due when you haven't looked at it for the previous week, maybe not your best choice there. Also, I saw a lot of people turning in things late already. Guys, it's only the second week of class. I have hardly assigned anything yet, so you might want to get on top of your stuff now, because it's only going to get harder for you to keep up as the semester continues. Just a thought. But again, let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. I'm around. Be good, guys.